Welcome to another episode of Community Conversations. This is the podcast for those who've got a heart for helping other people. Today we're going to talk about homelessness, and we are so grateful to have special guest today, Sonia Hornery, who's the MP for State Member for Wallsend, and also Rick Prosser, the CEO of the Soul Cafe. Great to have both of you with us here this evening.
Thank you very much, Pietro. Lovely to be here, and this is a most important issue, so I really appreciate the conversation.
Great to be with you, Pietro.
Thank you very much. We're going to start the program by actually just giving a brief introduction to Sonia Hornery. Many of our listeners may not be aware of who this awesome person is. So here we go. Sonia Hornery is State Member for Wallsend since March 2007. Also before that, former Newcastle City Councillor between 2002 and 2008. Grew up in a housing commission area, so obviously someone understands public housing in Edgeworth and also Windale. Sonia's got a heart for raising awareness within the community and for those doing it tough. Recently, what we read was that there was a plight of homelessness that hadn't been seen before. And you'd spoken in Parliament the night before. That post was put on the 12th of May about the housing crisis that's gripping the Wallsend electorate. You raised concerns that there are over 1,200 applications currently on the Newcastle social housing waitlist with a vacancy rate of less than 0.3% in the private rental market. And right now, tonight, there are 500 residents possibly facing eviction and with nowhere else to go. So that's wonderful what you're doing in the community, Sonia. So thank you once again. And now we'll just go to Rick Prosser, who's the CEO of Soul Cafe since 2016, and over 20 years, Rick, leading charities and serving the community of the Hunter with a heart for helping others. In 2014, you were awarded, Rick, with the Newcastle City Council Citizen of the Year. Recently, the Soul Cafe hosted its annual Sleep Out, where you raised, congratulations, over $175,000 from a combination of 351 sleepers, including Michael and myself. Congratulations, Rick, on all that you're doing and all the volunteers are doing. And welcome to you both to our podcast. So we might just kick off the first question for you, Sonia. What are people talking to you about regarding their struggle currently about finding suitable rentals, and what's causing the problem?
Thank you, Pietro. Homelessness and people having difficulty finding a home in general is a number one issue that we deal with in all electorates. And it doesn't matter what side you're on, if MPs were being honest, they would say that they have people knocking on their door every day, and it's a real issue. The problem is, and both governments, Labor, and as you mentioned that I was elected in the last term of what was a good Labor government, but went downhill, I thought, between 2007 and 2011 as we stopped building public housing. And when we stopped building public housing, the crisis became worse. So government hasn't built any public housing since before 2007, no government. They have obviously have arrangements with Compass and other private organisations that do really good work, but there's just not enough housing available for people. So, and I'll be quiet in a minute so Rick can have a go too.
You're doing
but,
well.
We know, even I was talking about Rotary this morning, one of the things that the Rotarians do is feed some of the people in Wallsend, and we know of 14 people that live just around the bridges every night, and sometimes it's quite young people. And so, why are people in Wallsend, in a good town with good people, living in this situation? So it's happening, and we really need to start looking at spending money on good quality public housing for our community right now. All governments.
Thank you. Rick, I'm just going to digress just a moment. Basically back to that sleep out. I want to just put it to you that we slept out at the Bolton Street car park. Can you see any potential in Newcastle for what's happening in Brisbane at the moment, which is a program called Bed Down, which basically providing pop-up beds in car parks for homeless people. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great initiative. I think now's the day to pioneer and create new initiatives. We need that. What worked yesterday is not going to work tomorrow. And so we need to continue to be entrepreneurial in our approaches to some of communities' deep-seated issues, and I think that's a great initiative. And so certainly if there's somebody listening to the podcast that's prepared to fund me, we'll make it happen.
You're the man to make it happen, mate.
I mean, it's like a lot of things. I'm not sure if there's funding available for those. We're just a grassroots charity. We're not government funded. And we would describe ourselves as a charity that catches people that fall through the cracks. I think that's a brilliant adaptation, actually, that car park initiative that's been trialled up there. Some of that's been piloted in other nations as well. It's brilliant.
To both of you, maybe, why does this problem of homelessness exist, in your opinion?
In many respects, the people that don't fit into the norm, that have difficulty, and as well as that, it's women getting older who lose their job, people who have alcohol and other addictions who get disenfranchised, people that just don't fit into that sort of society or have family support systems. So those people we need to look after, and they do fall through the cracks, especially with COVID. You know, there are lots of people with concerns and issues in the last year that we really haven't heard about. So I think Rick was exactly right. There will always be people that fall through the cracks, and how do we help them? And in some ways, what you were talking about in terms of providing accommodation for the evening for people and an ability to have a shower and, you know, all of those services and a laundry and all of those things, that's sometimes just what people want as well.
Would you like to add to that at all, Rick?
Yeah, look, I think it's a very complex issue, actually. We have a saying, everyone's got a unique story. And that story is always uniquely different to everyone else's story. And I think that's where a cookie-cutter approach just doesn't work. I mean, we work with people that we know we can find them a roof over their head, but they don't have the capacity to keep the roof over their head. And so that becomes another great challenge that we're faced with, whether it be mental health illness, whether it be addictions, whatever it is. It's very complex. And I think for our listeners to understand that this is not a simple fix at all. Homelessness is not a new issue. It's certainly a chronic pain in our cities, and healthy communities will look to move into that pain and alleviate the pain. But I mean, we work with people we know, even if we could provide them with a roof, they're not going to take it. And so, you know, it's a very complex issue and extremely challenging.
What can agencies do? What can other agencies do to perhaps support those that are homeless at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that collaboration's part of the future, and communication between agencies, and I think if we understand we're all in this together, it's not really about building a brand or a profile, it's about serving some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And I think that's got to be first and foremost actually in our minds. And, you know, knowing a little bit of the landscape, it can get complex for some agencies because there's government funding attached to it, and that's cyclic and then can become pretty competitive. You know, and so I think, though, we've got to be vying into some of the vulnerable people. Just to pick up on something Sonia alluded to in terms of housing, I mean, I think if we rewind the clock 20 and 30 years, we were building different types of homes as well, and now you go into suburbia, you've got 4-bedroom homes, 2 living spaces, and research says that only a small percentage of those homes actually get used. And so I think you know, we've really got to consider what do we want into our future, and is bigger and better actually better? And then I think that, you know, government probably could examine a little bit of the hoops and reports that people are required to build. I mean, everything's escalating, but it is within our power sometimes to say, no, we don't want the cost of these things to escalate. We don't need all these duplication of reports. You know, new estate and everyone's doing the same report for the same thing. It's just craziness. You know, somewhere we're going to have a bigger, broader picture to say, no, we interest rates are down, big tech, beautiful. Things, whilst they may not seem affordable, and for many people they're not, and particularly the demographic we're talking about, but surely we can make things easier. And there's some really entrepreneurial models happening around the nation in this.
Well, one of the things, one of our other colleagues here in the community, a lady called Christine Mastelli, is actually launching the Share Your Home program, which was funded by Joel Fitzgibbon, Labor MP, for the Hunter. And I think they're actually launching in July. It's a great model where basically those big mansions you're talking about, Rick, basically where you can share your home or part of your home. There's obviously a vetting process involved. And the great thing about that is that the pilot project is starting for 15 to 19-year-old youth, but also women. As you know, Sonia, that's a large cohort, as we know, that are homeless. It's the older women whose maybe partner, they've split up or whatever the case might be, whatever the case might be. They just haven't got the disposable income to be able to do and to rent, especially when we've got 0.3% vacancy rate, which is incredibly difficult to get your head around. Now, Rick, does having access to food and resources keep people living on the streets for a longer period of time? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, look, I've got no doubt some people would say that. I mean, the reality is we're just not feeding people. We're trying to house them as well. So it's not one or the other. Sonia made a good point that everyone deserves a roof over their head. Well, yeah, they do, absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. And everyone deserves a good feed in their belly. And the reality is we've got some people in our community that don't have a roof over their head, but surely they can get a good feed in their belly. So does it perpetuate things? I don't know. I think some would say, well, yeah, it does. I think it's just trying to be a little bit decent for people that are found themselves in difficult places. And you've got to understand that this issue is not isolated to people with addictions and mental health illnesses at all. We know it's not. And so many people can find themselves, out of a place and unable to find another place at any moment in time. And we opened up, during COVID, we opened up a new service, Open Pantry. 85%, we just had a hunch this was going to affect more people than we would normally serve. 85% of people that accessed that pantry, it was open 3 days a week, Open Pantry, come and pick up whatever you want, whatever we've got. 85% were new people coming in to see us. And so, these are people that, you wouldn't. They're normal people.
I recall last year when I was running a program out in Lake Macquarie called the Outback Yard program,
and we, a super program.
We started Manor House. It was just an idea that came out of heaven, I guess. And what we were seeing more and more was actually people who had just lost their jobs. They worked in the airline industry, and bang, overnight they weren't working anymore because there was no more flights. And all of a sudden, for the first time in their lives, they've had to come to a charity to get support. And I found that they really struggled even just coming through that threshold or that front door. And we've been providing that service to the community, just like you guys have and others.
Look, I think that's a great entrepreneurial approach. I mean, it's not the full answer, but it's an answer for some. And we know those that sleep in their cars, they suffer from a couple of things, a good night's sleep and a shower, and that provides it. If I had a car park in town, I'd have that working, and we should multiply that around the region. It's not the answer, but it actually allows people to transition from a place of difficulty into a place where there is a little bit more wraparound support. And we need those sort of things to fly, absolutely.
I'd like to ask you a question, Sonia. If you were in government, obviously you're the Labor MP at the moment, but if you're in government, what would you like to see being done for the homeless?
Well, the first thing is build public housing, but in a structural 21st century way that meant that we didn't have any kind of ghettoisation, but people found accommodation near where public transport is and lots of services. Because, especially Pietro, you and I know that living in the western suburbs, we're getting these huge developments occur and there's no public transport for people anyway. So, if we start talking about aged people, I worry that, many of the people aren't getting to services and they're isolated at home, which is what we saw with COVID last year, didn't we? Where we were just ringing people, anybody over 80, we just got on the phone and then we rang people and said, are you okay? Do you need milk? Do you need bread? Because people couldn't get out of their home. But a lot of, it was a great thing to do, so, but build public housing, look at organisations that are working and successful models like you've been talking about, even as a transition or what you're doing, Rick, or the Baptist Church at Wallsend who have built, got community building partnerships money to build shower facilities, because I know that's a real problem in Wallsend. Yep. We haven't got enough places. They used to be at the at Wallsend Park. The kind cleaner used to let people that were homeless living in that area in early in the morning so that at least they could use the toilet and, wash their hands and everything. We need more of those places for that transition. We need to be spending money and saying this is the number one priority, because if we help people both in a transition and then eventually get a house, if that's what they want, then we might we'll minimise domestic violence, we'll help people who are aged, we'll help those people who don't necessarily fit into society. So it needs to be a priority of any government.
You mentioned obviously public housing is important, the infrastructure, and obviously able to get to vital services. Where do you think in the Hunter region, where could we start such a program as you're envisaging?
If the land was available, you'd need to be around Hamilton and this sort of area, anywhere that's what they do in European countries. Build the good quality public housing around where people need to work and live and catch the train or catch a bus. So Wallsend in Wallsend Centre, fine. But when you look at areas like Maryland, and it's not the answer for people because it's too isolated, even though it's not that far if you don't have a car.
What's the current waiting list for a person who is homeless and looking to access public housing here in our electorate?
About 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah, 10-year waiting list.
And what do they do? What do they do in that meantime?
Struggle. Bad time, big time.
Thank you for being so open and honest with an answer there, Rick. What do you think? What do you think homeless people want and need, and why do you think we have this homeless problem at the moment? And I know this is a 3-part question, so I'll repeat again. What do homeless people want and need? Let's go with that. What do they want and need,
That's
mate?
a good question. Well, I think if you were just to be really basic on it, a homeless person needs a roof over their head. I think. What any and every person needs, they need to be validated, they need to be embraced, they need to be treated as you would want to be treated. I think deep within us all, there's a great desire and need for us to be valued, and I think that one of the great things that we can do as citizens in our community is value people to a greater degree. I mean, it's just crazy some of the things that you're seeing in culture now, people attacking all sorts of different people. It's like just lighten up, let a bit more kindness flow around. And, we try as best we can to create a culture of family, that people that come into our place, they're just loved and accepted for who they are. Because we know and understand that the story of the life we're reading right now, that chapter, there was other chapters that created that one, and most of them had no desire to live in this chapter. There was no dream and no desire for them to be in the situation they're in. And so our hope is that we can rewrite their next chapter. So I think they just need acceptance, they need love, they need to be cared for and treated with value and dignity. No matter what situation, what circumstance, no matter how they look and how they smell, they just need to be valued. I think that's the humanity issue, actually. And if we surfaced value on one another, then we'd end up with probably healthier communities. We may not solve all the problems, but certainly we could add to people's well-being. That's for sure.
I guess it's about extending kindness, isn't it? And doing what we have in our capacity to extend kindness and open up our hearts a little bit more.
I feel we need a lot more kindness in the world. It's vicious. You see some things out in the media and social media stuff. I say, you don't want to comment on some things because some other zealot's going to have a crack at you. It's like, come on, give us a break. We need a lot more kindness. Absolutely, we need. And if I'll tell you what, if that was to surface in our community, you would see a spirit of generosity flow. We saw this in the pandemic. We saw what happened. My observation is what happened is we become a lot more street and suburb conscious. and generous. I mean, those that weren't affected by unemployment and so on were very generous in their stewardship of what they had. I mean, holidays were cancelled, people weren't eating out, they weren't going to movies and buying coffees and stuff like that, which affected other places. But I felt the government did, in essence, a pretty good job, actually, in terms of helping people through that. And there's more challenges in other parts of the nation, of course. But I feel that if there's a positive to come out of the pandemic, it's hold on to that. Hold on to being more street and suburb conscious and aware of who's around and what's around you. Because it's easy to fly overseas, easy to fly in a state or somewhere at the expense of being aware and conscious of what's happening in our place and in our backyard.
So maybe to both of you, what is happening in our own backyard in Wallsend regarding being street conscious and, as Rick alluded to, about embracing the challenges that are ahead? I mean, obviously you're working with a lot of charities. Let's put it out there. Let's give a shout out to those people that are doing a good thing in the community.
There are so many great organisations, and you would know about them, Pietro. Starting with Rotary, Lions. And there are even individual groups that just come in into the office, for example, when we say, hey, there's a shout out, we need nappies, or we need socks for people, like we did for Wallsend, and all of a sudden people like to do that. I reckon they get a real buzz out of walking into someone's office and saying, I've just bought a pair of socks, and they put it down. It must just bring out the goodness in them. So when you can bring out the goodness in people, that's when they're not thinking about bad things, because they know then they're contributing. That's when it makes you feel happy too, that you recognise that, hey, there are heaps of people that really just want to do good stuff if they're given the opportunity to do it.
You're part of I know you got your hands in many pies. I know that. I know you're not just the CEO of the Soul Cafe, but you were involved in other stuff to do with other community groups in the Hunter. Can you share with us about what these groups are doing and how they may be helping those that are on struggle street at the moment?
Yeah, just to pick up, Sonia, I think Sonia made a great point. There's a feel good when people are giving beyond themselves. I believe we're created actually to go beyond ourselves, to contribute somewhere else into someone else's life. There's a transaction that happens within that's divine. It's like, it doesn't make sense in the natural for me to give away from myself, and yet we receive more than what we give. Look, I work a lot with grassroots type charities and works, and what we discover with the grassroots charities is that many of them have a capacity to move quite quick, to be very flexible in their approach. There's challenges with it, of course. But there's vast amounts of these works. And I think probably before the pandemic, the epidemic in our community was loneliness. And, apart from people, I feel that just deep within us, there's this desire and need for us to be validated and embraced. There's this need within humanity to connect with other people, and we see loneliness as a chronic issue, and I think that probably there's space and room for large scale, whether they be suburban or regional or citywide campaigns to encourage people out to meet their neighbours. I mean, end of March, I think it is, on a Sunday, it's National Neighbour Day. I mean, we should be just putting the wind up that thing, and every newspaper and TV and radio station should be promoting International Neighbour Day, encouraging people on that last Sunday. I think it's the last Sunday in March. Go and meet your neighbours, put on a barbecue, get licence from the council and shut your street down and have a street barbecue or something, you know what I mean? Because we know if we can end up connecting with people directly around us, we've got a support network. And so I think there's some really simple things that we can do that cost us nothing, that mobilise the population towards better communities.
I asked Sonia the question about when you're in government, what you propose to do. Obviously, you're not in government, Rick, but you are a great...
And I don't propose to.
No. But I'm just saying, if you had a magic wand, would you... But if you had the power to make significant change around homelessness, around the people that you're actually working with every day, and you had $1 gazillion, which you don't either. But let's imagine from it. Let's just vision.
Yeah,
what would be your response to that, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sonia mentioned a fellow that opened up the toilet block, and I feel that we need to bend and break some rules. Actually, this is a pioneering region.
It is, absolutely.
And entrepreneurialism is in the essence of the people here in this region, and so I think we should be having a crack at a few things out of the box, and really put the microscope on them. And collaborative working is part of the solution. But I think if we had capacity and unlimited financial capacity, or let's say we've got enough financial capacity, that's one thing. I mean, then the personnel is the next, and that's your biggest deal, the right people to outwork these things. Because funding's one thing, but without the right people with the right spirit and heart, it just becomes a job. I mean, I'm not on payroll. I don't do it for a job. I mean, it's a passion. But, I think that we could get a good think tank with some, whether it be national learning and international, there's some tremendous things happening over in England. In fact, other cities around Australia in terms of homelessness, there's some grassroots stuff that costs very little about helping merge people from one thing. I agree we need housing, and we certainly don't need it like it was. I mean, there's some brilliant people. I mean, we work with many people in Hamilton South. There's some brilliant people in there. But it becomes an epicentre of, unfortunately, we've got generational unemployment. So the role models there for some young kids is not cool. And so I think salt and peppering this sort of stuff around the region is very cool. I think we've got to consider, let's forget these big homes. Let's break some rules a little bit here. Let's create some rules. Let's have a go at piloting something, and let's have a go at something that other people aren't prepared to do.
Well, not far from us, just down the road in Gosford, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't there a group called Tiny Homes? Have you heard of them, Tiny Homes?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. There's some models on this where people are rent-to-purchase systems. Now, I think that would be the great liberator.
Yeah, great.
If you know that you're building into your future and you've got an asset at the end, I mean, my gosh, that's just a total game changer. Not just for you, but your family. Whoever that might be, because you end up building into something. You're not just renting and nothing there. And so there are some of these sort of models. They just need to be very well balanced with great community infrastructures around them. Yeah. And I would engage with a chaplain in those communities.
Oh, really?
Their main role is to foster healthy communities. I think there's many things that we can do like that. And these little tiny homes, they're really nice, actually. I mean, they're brilliant spaces, and so I think there's great scope for those sort of things. And so that would be a model. Yeah. And I think there's multiple models that we can learn from and pioneer, absolutely.
I've just got a final question here for both of you, and I'll just read it out to you. People living on the streets don't have a mental illness. In time, they'll probably develop one. What are your thoughts around this?
I think it's inevitable you're going to end up with issues. I mean, sleep deprivation is. I mean, look, some of our listeners, that have had children know what sleep deprivation is. In time of war, it was a form of torture. And so, you put that into everyday life. You don't have the energy and capacity to get up. And so that's horrendous. So if that happens day after day after day after day, you're going to end up with challenging issues. There's no doubt about it. Depression, anxiety, all these sorts of things are just going to cloud in over you because you're going to lose hope for tomorrow because it's going to look like the same as today. And where there's no hope, there's no future.
I totally agree. You're spot on. And I was just thinking of the role of councils and local government too, because it's something that we need to have a conversation with as well, how we can help at the most fundamental level. Because I know that, say, if I have a street stall, and Pietro, you've been involved with this stuff, 99% of the people that talk to me about problems when I'm, it's about council stuff. So it's really engaged in councils, even if it is getting them to maybe bend the rules a bit so that they do open the toilet earlier and keep it open, helping to have someone to just having more not maintenance, but just a bit more of using the resources that they already have in a really great way, so that they're being used like we were talking about 24/7. So I really like that model that I saw on television too about the car park and the shopping centres. So, but I think that's a role for a state government and federal government to help as well, because we can't be expecting, the owners of the shopping centres to continually do that stuff. But without all of the complication of right, we're going to give you this amount of money, but you have to jump over 57,000 hoops. We need to make it easier for people to do the right thing too.
I just want to say how greatly privileged I am to have both of you here this evening on a cold night. I want to thank you so much for being with us. We will post some links later on, but before we go, would you be able to tell our listeners, because our podcast is really about providing information not just to the public but also to community services and those who are working, like social workers and those people work in the community sector, on how they can actually help the people that we want to help, which are the homeless people. So just before we wrap up, could I just ask you, how does the public get to know or find out more about you, or how do they locate you? Do you have a website that you could share, or is there a phone number? Or
we've got a website, soulcafe.org.au, and Facebook is regular updates, and there's many ways people can engage. Volunteers, we've got about 180 volunteers that give over 600 hours a week. But I would say as well to our listeners, that's our work at Soul Cafe in the city of Newcastle. But right where you're at, and I don't know where you're located, you could be in a town listening somewhere else in Australia in this podcast. There's somewhere near you that is doing something significant, and you can add value to that. You don't need to start up anything else. You just look around and be an advocate for. But don't just be an advocate for by sharing something on Facebook. Actually do something. I think that it's become too easy to talk about something or share something on Facebook or whatever without actually doing something. And I like to think that we can put legs on things, and perhaps you're listening. I just want to encourage you. You could be the solution to somebody else's great challenges. You could be the person that's going to bring life and hope into somebody else's life. You could be the person that's going to bring your skill base into somebody else's world that add value and capacity to an organisation right near you. And so I just encourage you to move and act on that thought. And don't sit on it too long, because it's probably you've been sitting on it for a while. You could do something. Well, now's the time. I think now's the time for action, absolutely. And there's many great charities and works are right near.
Thank you, Rick.
And I agree with Rick. Every country town, I spent a lot of time in Walgett and Kempsey, and whether it's a CWA or a men's shed or knocking on the door of the church or your local MP's office, they all know. They all know where you can help. But instead of being on Facebook, just knock on that door and say, look, I've got a couple of hours. Can I help do something? And you're right, it's very enriching. So, and look, the reality is governments will never have enough funding to provide for everyone. And when people say, why there are volunteers, why doesn't the reality is, how much taxes do we want to pay? I'm quite more than happy that the more I earn, the more tax I pay. But the reality is there's good in volunteering anyway.
Well, I want to thank you again. Thank you, Rick Prosser, CEO of the Soul Cafe, and Sonia Hornery, State Member for Wallsend. Appreciate your time with us on our podcast. You've been listening to Community Conversations with Pietro, and this is the podcast for those that have a heart to help others. If anything about this podcast has particularly resonated with you, or if you felt a little bit struggle with any mental health issues in relation to this podcast, and you're in Australia, I'd like you to reach out to Lifeline, and the number is 131114. Thank you again for listening, and have a beautiful day.